the Youth Book Festival, and on the left we have the Australian illustrator and author Shaun Tan. On the right we have the artist and illustrator Sebastian Meschenmoser, and we are very glad that you guys are both here and we can have a quick talk and an interview. I don't know, we will chat a little bit, and I hope it will be amazing. So, yes.
Great. Well, it's wonderful to be here, and thanks for making this possible. And I hope the connection's okay. If the sound quality is not quite good, I might be able to fix it, but just let me know.
Okay.
The sound is fine at the moment. Yeah.
So we are able to understand you. That's no problem, I guess. Okay, so ich glaube, der Mikro.
So we start now. Yes.
Okay. So we're going to start with our first question. How would you both describe your style?
Would you like to go first?
How would I describe my style? I think it's a bit difficult because I did not study illustration in the first time. I studied fine arts, and so I'm coming from a different direction. So maybe it's a bit the border between fine art and illustration. And I try to put a bit from both in my work. Yeah, that's why.
I would say I'm the same. My background is also more of a fine arts background, and as an illustrator, I learned how to illustrate when I was a teenager by just doing it and sending my work into small press science fiction magazines and getting other smaller jobs and just building up from there. But I never formally trained as a picture book illustrator or somebody who was setting out to create illustrated narrative. I was just doing one job at a time and basically trying to make a living. And it turned out that the world of children's literature and picture books showed an interest in my work, and that's how I started to become an illustrator.
Can you actually study illustration in Australia? Because here in Germany you can study it in 2 cities, and the other possibilities is to study communication design, and this is very, very small part with really illustration.
Yes, you can study illustration. That's become more the case now than when I was studying, and this is going back 20 years, I think. And it was where I was growing up was in Perth in Western Australia. That's quite an isolated city. So it's 2,500 kilometres from the nearest other city of its size. And there were some illustration courses, but they weren't very good, I don't think. They were more like technical illustration and stuff like that. There was no culture of this idea of illustrated narrative as a profound art form.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the answer. You both did illustrations. What do you think art can do that words cannot?
I like working with pictures and text besides. I think we have a quite similar way of telling stories, Shaun Tan and me, because sometimes I write my text myself. Sometimes I just have a picture there. I don't have to write anything because the picture shows it all. And I like just giving a small comment which is fitting the picture or maybe not at all fitting the picture. And that's a nice way of working. And that's a big privilege you have when you write your text by yourself, that you can combine text and picture in a different way than the classical illustrator author work would be.
Yes. I work that way too. I began working as an illustrator in a highly collaborative way. in part because maybe at the time that I started I was very young and I wasn't such a good writer. So I really benefited from having the work of better writers. But over time I've been studying creative writing actually longer than I've been studying fine art. So I really wanted to be a writer starting from about the age of 13. That's when I first got the idea, you know, I want to be a writer, like a serious writer. But it's only sort of much later that I started to come back to writing through illustration, and really because working for other people's stories, I really enjoyed that. It was very, it helped me to develop as an artist and move my imagination in different directions. But I also had ideas for narratives that I wanted to do, and some of those needed words and some of those didn't. And these days I spend most of my time, or all of my time, really working on my own written and illustrated text. And I like the fact that it's like a ping pong game, because you can just change, you know. If you get stuck with writing, and you always do, you can go and do some drawing and try and solve the problem that way. Then you get stuck with drawing, and then you can go back to writing, and the story evolves or the book evolves, and it becomes something really unexpected. And I think that it really helps to be able to skip between writing and illustration.
Yeah. I also like leaving the reader alone with just pictures. And some parents really hate it, that they can't read anything. They have to talk to their children because they're just pictures.
Yes.
The nice thing you can do by yourself, you just leave the text out.
Yeah, well, that's my question always with a story is, the first question is, if it's a written story, does it need illustrations? And in many cases it doesn't, in which case it's better not to have any pictures. But sometimes, you know, the illustrations are really necessary, but not to explain what's going on, but to rather show things that can't be described by words. So like, say it's a creature, an imaginary creature. It would be really clumsy to try and describe the kind of weirdness or something just like weirdness. How do you describe weirdness? Well, you're using words like, oh, it was weird, it was strange, but that doesn't quite convey the feeling of seeing something that you don't understand. So it's better to just draw it and just say, well, there it is, and then have no words at all, and it conveys the experience much more effectively. So, some picture books don't need pictures, you know, some texts don't need pictures. I would say some picture books don't need words also, and there's a lot of, I'm sure you're the same, there's a lot of experiments trying out and failing before coming up with a simple solution where you decide, okay, this many words, this many pictures.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Maybe now a little bit more technical. So we noticed that you have a very different approach to details. So the question is, how important are details in general? I don't know.
Me first again.
I could go first. just to mix it up. When I was that's a really good question, actually. It's a really good question because I change my mind about that very often. Sometimes I think the details are really important. In fact, the most important part, almost like the rest of the work, is the scaffolding of the building and the structure, just so that you can have the ornament and the fixtures and the windows and the nice doors and all that sort of stuff, the details. And then at other times, my feeling is that, details are a real distraction. They do start feeling ornamental. They start feeling slightly obsessive. And this is a problem if you're a visual artist or a writer, I suppose, is that you tend to get obsessed about details, you know, and you can spend a lot of time drawing tiny little things that nobody else is ever going to notice. And I'm constantly moving back and forth. Oh, details, no detail, more details, less details. And I think the story kind of evolves really out of that process of having and subtracting details. But I would say that for me, the important thing about detail is, particularly in a picture book, is to have little things in the picture that somebody doesn't notice on the first pass. And I really want them to go back and look again and notice it the second time. And they might even be details that reference things that haven't happened yet. And that to me is very interesting. So I think with most works of art, including film as well, sometimes the second time is the best time. And you would know also in rehearsals that, when you're doing a performance, often the fact that you're doing multiple presentations really helps because it enriches the project and little details come in and they become more and more profound and other less important details drop away. But yes, it's so I think detail is really important. It also can become an obsessive distraction.
Yeah, it's the same with me. I always have to decide what the story demands. If I have a story which is told very fast, where there's lots of actions and lots of things happening, I don't need so many details because they will slow down the story. And I want the reader to turn around the page and read the next picture, and it has to be the story has to be told very fast. But I also know that children will pick the book and watch the book by themselves without reading. So it's important to have some small things they can discover and come back to. And I always like to hide little mice in the books or some details. Or there is a palm. When I was starting out, we had a palm tree and some piece fall off, and I planted it in a. And it's growing and growing, and this palm is always appearing in my books, and it's growing and growing. And in the later books, it's bigger, but at the moment, it's in a very bad state. I hope it doesn't look that good. I don't know why. I have to find another place for it, maybe in my studio. But I like to hide things from my flat also in those books. Some furnitures appear there. I also hide, the Groucho Marx nose, mustache, and eyebrow. I hide this in every book, and I hide myself in every book. So I have fun hiding little things somewhere, and so readers who read the books more often will have something to search.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd agree with that too. I do the same thing, and there you're saying the opposite of when things are moving along fast, you don't want too much detail to slow it down. Sometimes you do want the reader to slow down. Say you come to a landscape of a city or something. You want to put those details in and just say, hey, slow down and really, really look at this, because the tendency for most of us, and I include myself, is to so keen to move on to the next image. I just want to see what happens next. And in a story, it can be hard to actually make people stop and look, including yourself. So detail can be a really important device, and those little hidden things, which can seem like a game. Let's find the Groucho Marx glasses, or in my case, a red leaf or something like that. But it's a way of, it is a conscious device for actually saying, hey, just slow down and take your time. There's no rush.
Yeah. And take out the book again and watch every page just as a painting or just as a picture.
Yeah. Yes.
From there as well, yeah.
So, thank you. Next question. What is the weirdest thing you ever drew?
The weirdest thing, I draw lots of weird things.
Yeah.
I think.
What is the most ordinary?
Yes.
Maybe something out of the Never-Ending Story. There was the city of the old Emperor city. I think there are lots of weird things there. Maybe it will be. Maybe it's that one. Yeah, it's this totally.
Oh.
totally messy. And maybe that's the weirdest thing.
Okay.
That's
yeah,
sure.
actually, I was looking at your work, and that was the picture that I stopped on, because
Really?
I just thought that's weird, you know. And it also felt really dreamlike to me. There was something about that picture. It had the real, and it's actually a real difficult thing to get, is because weird and obscure, that's easy to do. You just put random things together, but to get that particular feeling of that surrealist feeling of a dream where in one hand it's just chaotic and confusing, but it also has some kind of hidden logic to it. And that can be through the use of lighting and composition and the different elements. But yeah, that's quite hard to achieve. So I think, but I was admiring that particular painting. In my case, I think I'd like to say that, you know, it's almost like, what's the weirdest thing you've ever drawn? It's almost like saying, well, which of your children do you love the best? I like to think that they're all as equally weird as each other. And I'm always keep working on them until they feel weird enough. And by weird, I would just mean not entirely familiar. So for me, I'm really happy with a painting when I don't fully understand it. And that's quite a difficult thing to achieve, because you're sitting there doing things deliberately and consciously, but you want to get to a point where the picture starts sort of speaking back to you and saying, hey, I have my own life. This is what I'm going to look like. Now you draw me. And then I just listen to this almost like a daydreamy voice, and I just draw the things that the picture tells me to draw. And I like that, because it feels like then I'm a reader too. I'm not a puppet master controlling a story. I'm in there just, you know, enjoying it and enjoying the strangeness of it.
Yeah, it's your subconscious taking over the control in some way.
Yeah, which is, you have to do a lot of work before you get to that point. And it's frustrating because you can't control that. You can't just turn it on and off. But it's nice when it happens, when you're at the drawing table, and it's more like you're listening rather than talking, you know.
Yeah. That's very nice. I'm planning to get weirder as well.
Yeah, me too.
Why does it look like you have it's morning in Australia and it's evening in Germany?
Oh no, it's
probably
actually
stage lighting.
evening here. It's nighttime, but it's summer, so it's still actually quite bright outside, and it's actually been really hot too. It was 42 degrees Celsius yesterday, and it's just starting to cool down. So I'm sure it's a little different where you are.
Oh yes.
I wanted to ask, are there things you imagine that you cannot draw, and how do you deal with that?
It's difficult. Maybe there are some things you can't just draw in one drawing. Maybe you need more pictures to picture it, actually. And that's why I make a picture book out of it. But I think there are some ideas I want to put in a story or in a picture, but it would be too I don't know the vocabulary. Maybe too naive or too flat or too stupid to just make one drawing. Maybe it needs more storytelling or more telling just around it, to not name it and everyone knows what is meant anyway. Maybe something like this.
I think it's it feels like that was more of a problem when I was a young artist, and my feeling then was that you came up with an idea and then you tried to draw it. And the older I get, the more I realize that it's kind of the other way around. You just start drawing something and then hope that the ideas come out of the drawing, and you just you adapt. So instead of trying, say you might get an idea, it might be an impression or a particular feeling or a concept, and you go, okay, in my mind I know what that looks like. you'll try to start drawing it, and for me, it never turns out the way I want to. Like, never. It's never like the way I imagined it. But instead of freaking out about that, I just, these days, I just go, okay, so it's different, and it could be because I'm limited in my abilities to draw the thing, or it could be that I'm forgetting what the thing was, a bit like trying to recall a dream. And so I just go, okay, well, let's just let it evolve by itself. So as an older artist, I now feel that, like Paul Klee would say, I'm just taking a line for a walk. It's just going to turn out the way it's going to turn out. My job is to improvise and adapt, and not try to control it or grab the eraser and start rubbing out and drawing it again, but just to go, okay, well, that tail now looks like an arm, so let's make it an arm. That hill is looking like a building, so now it's a building. It's not in the woods anymore, it's in a city. And I just let it go. And I guess it's like I don't feel the need to control it so much anymore. I just let it go. And it'll be different, but hopefully it'll still be good.
But it's quite the technique the surreal painters made, to just start and something's happening in the painting.
Yes.
I have a question with this book here. Were the stories first or the paintings? Because sometimes I had the impression that there was a painting and the author wrote the story, or the other way around. It was not. I'm not quite sure about this.
That's good. That's good that you weren't sure. I hope it wasn't too obvious which I say it's about 50-50. So, like that image you just saw on the cover, the moonfish, the boy holding the fish. The story first, no visual images, and then the painting long time after the story. But in other cases, like there's an eagle in an airport. That was just an image that came to me suddenly when I was in an airport, and I thought I have to paint something like that. And again, it didn't turn out exactly the way I imagined, but it was close enough. And then I was thinking, well, what's that story about? And I wrote the story after the image. So that was, it goes for me usually both ways. It's whichever comes first. What was that for you? Do you start with mostly words first and then images, or is it image based?
I have so it's event based maybe. Sometimes I get my ideas out of nothing. There's once my little cousin was at home, and I had a pullover put over a chair to dry there, and she said, "Oh, it's so funny the chair is wearing a pullover," and instantly I had the idea for Pac-Man and the Wonder Wool, that he's knitting stuff for his furniture. And there are just little things in my life which happen, and they give me a detail of the idea, and I put these fragments of ideas in my brain, and when I decide they're ready or they fit together, then I write the story. Or first I make a storyboard, I make many drawings just for the movie, and then in the end I add the text when all the drawings are finished.
Uh-huh. Yeah, my process is actually pretty similar. Yeah.
Is that often like this, that you go so in your daily life that you often think in images right away when you see something? And yes.
Yeah, it's important to go outside and experience things and talk to people and let things happen, and then you get ideas, I think. I never sat at my table and was thinking about what could I write about next. I never thought about having I needed an idea, because they came to me and I let them come, and that's the way it's the best for me to work.
Yeah, I'm the same. Going out for a long walk is usually very helpful when feeling creatively blocked. But also, if I sit at a table and I have a blank piece of paper in front of me and somebody says write a story, I'm going to write and draw the same story that I've done in the past. I will be totally unimaginative. I have to be looking at something and reacting to something. So I go out and I gather lots of images and objects and things, and I look at those. But for me, it often the origin of an idea is usually visual, and I think one of the reasons is that for me, visual experience is more accidental. With words, there's almost too much meaning connected with words, and there's a way of putting them together, and there's a way that language works. And great writers are kind of able to circumvent that and sort of be very loose with the meanings of words and the way they fit together. For me, I seem to be better at that with pictures. For instance, the technique of collage, where you get a whole bunch of pictures and cut them up and move them around, that's a really great way of inspiring story ideas, because you're getting visual accidents. So these weird things appear and your brain is struggling to make sense of them, and it's that struggle to make sense of things that creates stories. And little mistakes in perception. So you'll see the way things overlap in the landscape, like say a fruit against a building, or, with a shadow falling in a funny way. And for a moment it looks like a demon or whatever. And instead of dismissing that and saying, oh, that's a mistake of perception, I will go, that's interesting. What if that was actually real? How would I react to it, and what would happen next? And so it's really about being open to mistakes. That works with words and mishearing things and funny things that happen when people make mistakes with communication. But for me, visual mistakes are like really important for generating story ideas.
Yeah, you have to look for them, or to I have it very often when
your brain is always just saying, forget that, that's nonsense, don't look at that, keep driving. And to be an artist, you have to be kind of driving, looking out the window all the time, which can be a little dangerous, but that's kind of how you get ideas, and trying to get your brain to work in a non-logical way.
What I like for getting ideas is also being bored. When I go by the underground, I don't take books with me, and I just like sitting there and watching. And then when it's the most boring moment, the nicest idea come to me. But actually, when you go to Berlin by the underground train, you get too many ideas sometimes.
Yes, aeroplanes also good. I don't know if you've noticed. and
taking a bath is very good for getting ideas.
Yep. And for me, washing dishes. Everything associated with that, dishwashing detergent, should be tax deductible, because it's like I solve a lot of creative problems too by just not being at the desk. I think it can be a mistake to be at a desk, at a writing desk, or be at the easel and try to solve your problems there. Sometimes it's best to just leave and do something else.
Yes.
Yeah. So is there any music, or especially a story, that you always wanted to illustrate?
Music or story?
Both. So choose one.
There's a very nice song by Tom Waits of a bird and a whale, which would be nice as an illustrated book, but it's a very short story. I like listening to Tom Waits music when I work sometimes. Regarding to the stories I would like to illustrate, I already had this project with the Never-Ending Story, which I always wanted to, so I'm very about that happens, and we will see what I would like to illustrate Momo as well, but I'm not sure this will work out, because there is already a nice illustrated version of this, but that would be something I would like to do. But generally I will start with my own story next month, I think. So.
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer, but it's a good question, because often when I hear a song, especially a well-written song, I think that's a picture book text. It's so similar in structure, and song lyrics are actually great picture book text, because they sort of say things, but in such a way that they're so open to interpretation, and they're illustrated in the mind of the listener. So, and that's what you want to do when you illustrate a picture book. What you have to be careful about is like leaving space in the audience's mind to still keep filling in gaps and doing their own improvised imaginative visual images. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but it happens all the time that I'll read something and I'll see something or hear a song and I go, that would be a great book. And I can, if it was illustrated by this person or this person or this person. I think music videos are actually very close to picture books. And I went through a period where a lot of my creative inspiration came from actually not reading picture books but watching music videos, especially where there is no connection between the music and the visual image. I really like that. When the story visually is completely different than what the music is saying, that fascinates me. And I think as far as illustrating a book goes, I've often thought about George Orwell's Animal Farm, just because it was very influential on me as a child. I was accidentally read this book as a very small child by my mother, who didn't know what it was about, and it left a strong positive impression on me. Like it probably ignited my attraction for dark stories with disturbing endings. I just don't know that it's a book that needs pictures, but it's one that is, I think it's very kind of potent visually for me when I read it. And I like the fact that even though that story was about Soviet era politics, you could actually, it even works in, Trump era United States, even though it's politically very different. It's so interesting the way the story about these animals just happens again and again. You just look at the history of every country in the world and this is same patterns happen. And I think it's just like a really, really kind of iconic, simple story that, it's been illustrated a lot before by different artists. And, one day maybe I'll have a go at it.
Yeah, you should. I think they really can be illustrated, because when you illustrate it, you put it back up in the spotlight, and it's always a contemporary book. But when you make illustrations for it, everybody will see, oh, it's a newly illustrated book. Let's read it again, because to forget those books. And if you illustrate them, it becomes a new book in a way, and then it's read again.
Yeah, that's right.
Well,
more questions?
Yeah, we do, but we do have to end it soon. So I'm going to ask one question that I'm particularly interested in. I don't know, everyone sort of likes to sketch while telephoning. So do you do that too? And if yes, what type of sketches do you do?
I can go first by just saying my drawing when I'm on the phone is absolutely terrible. I don't know what it is, but, and it's funny because I can listen to music and audiobooks and so on and paint. It's like there's two parts of my brain. I can do that simultaneously and they don't conflict. When I'm writing or speaking to somebody, I have to shut off all the other stuff. I really can't use words without real focus. It's like it uses up a lot of energy. And as a result, my telephone doodles probably look exactly like yours. They're like, I draw little triangles and color them in. Then I draw another little triangle and daisies and stars and things like that. So they're and it doesn't look like my style at all. So it's quite interesting.
The question was if I was drawing while somebody calls. I never do this. Actually, I don't really like talking on the telephone. So that's why I don't draw while I do this. And I would like walking around when I'm talking on the telephone, so I can't draw because I'm walking around. No, there are no telephone drawings.
Yeah, very rare creatures. The artist's telephone drawings.
Maybe you should make a book with telephone drawings of different people.
That would be a good one. Telephone drawings, little triangles.
Okay, so our last question. Our last question is about light, and what kind of role does light play in your art?
It depends on the technique. I think that I choose usually, or unfortunately, light did not play a lot of role in most of my books because it was mostly about the story and the figures. And when I made this never-ending storybook, light was becoming very important. When I do my fine arts paintings as well, on there light is becoming very important because I work with the oil painting. And when you work with oil, it's very easy to involve light and light situations. So depending on the technique, light becomes very, very important because you can create a special atmosphere with it. And yes, when I work more with oil, I will also work warm with the light. So deciding for the technique is always depending on the story you want to tell and the atmosphere you want to create.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a really, light is, as a painter, light is almost everything. But yeah, especially when you're doing representational oil paint, like if you're painting objects in an illusionistic way, it's all about light because when you think about it, the world is really in darkness. The light is just, when you take away the light, there's nothing there. It's all black. So the light is a thing that defines form, but also subconsciously it defines how we react to things even when we're not aware of it. So for me, weather, for instance, is very important in my work. And I often bemoan the fact in illustrations of scenes, especially in animated film, the absence of weather. And that to me, it's always a sign of a good visual artist when you can tell what time of the day it is, what the weather situation is, sometimes even how hot or cold or windy or whatever. So if you look, for instance, at the films of Miyazaki, the Studio Ghibli films, there's always weather in every single scene. It's all about weather. You know what season it is, you know what time of day, you can hear the cicadas or whatever. So he's really thinking about that in his creative team. And for me, light is a good way of exactly that, just atmosphere. And you can make the same scene of, say, an apple tree in a field look really beautiful and relaxing and absolutely horrifying and disturbing, and just by changing the light. And so that fascinates me, and I'm always playing with light. I'm always going out and painting to learn new things about light. It's like a endless study.
You always paint with oil paintings, or
mostly.
I saw it here because you also had quite big formats, like 1.60 meters or something, and yeah.
That's
and
right,
do you also formats because you can work faster with that?
There's a few reasons. One of them is actually my eyesight has changed, so I find it harder to work on tiny details close up, and also I find it's easier for me to work at an easel standing up and moving around a studio space. Yeah. So it's very, like, my posture tends to really degenerate, and this is a problem when you're illustrating or writing, is you forget that your body exists and you sort of become a little hunched up ball. And I found so about, a decade ago, I started to work more standing up, using more, the size helps me use my arm more. So instead of doing this, I'm doing these gestures, and I like it. I like the work, the way the work looks when I paint larger, and creates a bit of a storage problem. But aside from that, it's much more satisfying. But then it really depends on the medium and as you say, the kind of story. Sometimes tiny little drawings that have much more charm and spontaneity. So it's just about finding the right medium and the right style for a story.
Yeah. You work at home or you have a separate studio? Because I think all colors are smelling as well in Australia, I think.
Yes. For painting, I have a separate studio. For other illustration work, I usually have a home studio. But yes, especially when I started doing the larger oil paintings, I consciously went and I got a well-ventilated space, which is a shared space with a number of other artists in an old factory. And, because otherwise you'll pass out or some other terrible thing will happen in the long term.
Yeah. Then there come the weird ideas.
Yeah, that's right. There's good weirdness and bad weirdness.
Yeah. But I have to say, I work at home with my when I make the very intimate stories, I have to work at home because this is a very safe space at my desk. Yeah. And when I do the paintings, I can go to the studio and have a shared industry with some friends as well. And there can be big, and there I don't care if everybody comes around and looks at the painting and gives a comment, but at home I don't like this at all.
I'm the same. I'm exactly the same. Sometimes I do want to do the oil painting at home, and it's not uncommon for me to actually wear a gas mask. It's a bit awkward, but you suffer for the art. Put the gas mask on, and in a badly ventilated space.
So I did lie. We have another question, not from us, but from someone from our group.
Thank you for your talk. It was very inspiring for me. I have a last question. Do you have a message you try to express or bring across to your readers with your art?
If I had a message which was so easy to form in words, I would write it down. But I think if you read all my books again and again and again, maybe you find something. But I don't have one general message. I think it would be too easy, maybe.
Yeah.
I think, a bit of ideas in every book, and but no central message in a way.
It's also a question of whether we ourselves know that message. So there could be one, but we don't know what that is. Sometimes I think, even in a situation like this where you're talking with authors and illustrators, there can be too much impression that we understand what we're doing, and it's nice when we don't. And I often look back at past work that I've done, and it's quite surprising to me because I realize, there is a connecting theme there. Which I wasn't conscious of when I was working. I'm not really sure what it is now, but if I had to talk about reflecting on past work and how that seems to come across, I would say that I'm interested in characters who have no voice. That's something that interests me. I don't know what I'm saying about that exactly, but it's a justice issue. It's something about power and the unequal distribution of power in society and in every place. And the other thing is I'm really careful not to have any message at all, or any political opinion or any kind of, I would say a sermon, like any sermonizing message. So that as a theme interests me, the idea of can you communicate ideas without being too opinionated or sermonizing or pretending that you're wise. So that's something that interests me. And I guess what I'm trying to say is I like the idea of individuals thinking about things for themselves. So if there is a theme in my stories, it's about individuals thinking about things for themselves and not being brainwashed or following a ideology because it's convenient, but actually sort of, waking up and sort of saying, hey, is this right? Is this wrong? Does the world have to be this way? Could it be different? And I love those kind of stories, and I always did when I was a little kid. So that's kind of the message is decide for yourself, I guess, and use your imagination.
And messages are always, they're not flexible. If you write a story with one message in it and the reader doesn't get the message, so the whole story fades.
Right. And it will be forgotten. It will be forgotten. Yeah. No one will remember that story.
That's interesting what you said, because sometimes when I read my first books or some other books I wrote, then I recognize what I actually wrote or what the story might have been about, which while I'm doing this, I'm not conscious about that.
Yeah, that's right.
But looking back at the stories, you experience, there's something in it. And then you talk differently about it when you talk with other people and they see other things in your story, and then you recognize, okay, that's maybe something my subconscious made me write.
Yes, and you're also trusting that you are part of a larger wisdom amongst readers, that they I think what it's interesting that we can all read a weird story and have the same sort of strong reaction to it, but also find it hard to explain, and that's kind of heartening. It almost feels like on an emotional level we're all united, or we all recognize a truth, even if we can't say what that truth is. And what you said is exactly right. It's funny that you don't really know what the message is, but you feel that there's something there. You know there's something there, but you can't describe it. And writing and illustrating is your attempt to transmit it without killing it, by explaining it too much. And, at the end of the day, it either works or it doesn't work. And you never know. Like, some stories work and some don't. You just don't know. Everything's an experiment.
Yeah.
What great last words. Thank you very, very much for this amazing interview. I think we all learned a lot and it was very inspiring. Thank you a lot and have a good day. And yes, applause.
And thanks for all your work too. And
come to maybe this year or sometime. Or have you been in Germany already?
Yes, I have. I have a young family at the moment, so it makes it a little difficult to travel. But I've been in Germany quite a few times. In the past. So I hope to
come
return
visit us the next time. Yes, please. Yeah. You're both very invited to visit us here.
Thank you.
Would be great. Yes.
Very much.
Yes, I would love to.
Amazing. Yes. So, thank you. And
thank you.
Okay.
See you next time, maybe.
See you.
Good luck with everything.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.